My parents looked at me across the kitchen table and said, "Either pay us $1,400 in rent or leave the house. We don't care that you're paying school fees." The words landed harder than the chipped mug in my hand. I remember the hum of the fridge, the way my mother wouldn't meet my eyes, the way my father folded his arms like this was a business deal, not family. I had just transferred my tuition that morning. My bank app was still open on my phone. Rent. From their own child. In the house I'd grown up in. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I didn't explain my budget or my exhaustion. I just nodded and said, "Okay." They looked relieved, like they'd won. They didn't realize that okay wasn't surrender. It was the moment I stopped paying for comfort that wasn't mine, and started reclaiming everything I was quietly funding. I'm the middle child, the quiet one people forget to count when they're naming sacrifices. Growing up, I learned early that love in my family came with conditions. Be useful. Be grateful. Don't ask for too much. I followed those rules well. Too well. When I got into school, I didn't ask them to help. I worked extra shifts, took loans, paid my own fees. Somewhere along the way, independent turned into convenient. I became the invisible safety net. The one who handled the internet bill because I needed it for classes anyway. The one who put the phone plan in my name because it was cheaper as a family bundle. The one who paid for streaming so everyone could unwind at night while I studied in my room. No one ever sat me down and said thank you. They just let it become normal. At dinner, decisions were made without me. My opinions were brushed past like background noise. If something broke, it was somehow my responsibility to fix it. If money was tight, eyes drifted in my direction without a word being spoken. I noticed it all. The assumptions. The entitlement. The way my parents spoke to me when they were stressed, sharp, transactional, as if I were a tenant who'd overstayed their welcome rather than their child. Still, I stayed quiet. I told myself it was temporary. That once I finished school, things would change. What I didn't realize was that, to them, I had already changed. I wasn't family anymore. I was a bill they thought I'd keep paying, no matter how they treated me. The demand didn't come out of nowhere. It had been rehearsed in 100 small moments before it was ever spoken. It was the way my mother would sigh when she saw me studying at the table, then say, "Must be nice to just sit all day." The way my father would ask how much I had saved lately, not out of concern, but calculation. The way conversations stopped when I walked into the room, then restarted in lower voices, like I wasn't meant to hear my own future being discussed. They started referring to my room as your space, not your room. My groceries were labeled. My showers were timed. Once, my dad joked, half smiling, that if I was basically an adult, adults paid rent. He laughed. No one else did. At dinner, the TV would be loud, and I'd catch glances exchanged over my head. When I spoke, my words landed flat, unanswered, drifting away like steam. When bills arrived in the mail, they were left on the counter where I'd see them, unopened, like reminders of what they expected me to do without being asked. The night before the ultimatum, the internet slowed to a crawl. My mother shrugged and said, "Maybe you're using it too much." I knew then. Not because of what she said, but because of how calmly she said it. They weren't angry. They were testing limits. They had already decided I would bend. What they didn't see was that every small insult was doing the opposite, quietly preparing me to stop absorbing their weight and let it fall where it belonged. The turning point wasn't dramatic. No doors slammed. No voices were raised. It happened in the space between my father's ultimatum and my own heartbeat slowing down. After I said okay, I went back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed. The walls were bare. Most of what I owned fit into a few boxes. That should have scared me. Instead, it clarified something I'd been avoiding for years. I opened my laptop to check my account balances. Tuition paid. Rent they wanted. Groceries I covered. Bills in my name. I stared at the numbers until they stopped looking like obligations and started looking like leverage. That's when it landed. I wasn't dependent on them. They were dependent on me, just quietly enough that they thought I wouldn't notice. I thought about every time I'd swallowed discomfort to keep the peace. Every time I'd paid a little more so no one else had to worry. I realized that the moment they turned our relationship into a transaction, I was allowed to respond like one. I packed without rushing. Clothes folded. Books stacked. Chargers unplugged. With each item, the knot in my chest loosened. This wasn't running away. It was choosing terms I could live with. Before I closed my bag, I paused. Not out of doubt, but resolve. They had given me a choice. And for the first time, I chose myself, calmly, cleanly, and without asking permission. I didn't move out in anger. I moved out with a checklist. I sat at my desk and opened every account that had my name on it. Internet service. Mine. Streaming platforms. Mine. Family phone plan. Under my email, my card, my signature. At the time, it had felt easier to centralize everything. Now it felt educational. I reread contracts the way I used to read exam questions. Slow, precise, unemotional. No penalties for cancellation. No shared liability. No warnings required. I wasn't taking anything that wasn't legally mine. I was simply withdrawing support I had never been obligated to provide. I scheduled the internet termination for midnight. Not to be dramatic, just efficient. I changed passwords with the same calm focus I used during finals. One click at a time. No notes left behind. No explanations written. For the phone plan, I confirmed that porting numbers would require their authorization. Canceling wouldn't. I made sure autopay was off. I took screenshots. I archived confirmation emails. Documentation mattered. I'd learned that from years of being blamed when things went wrong. Only after everything was set did I text a friend to confirm the couch I'd be sleeping on for a week. Then I ordered a small storage unit near campus. Cheap. Temporary. Enough. By the time I zipped my bag, my hands weren't shaking anymore. This wasn't revenge fueled by spite. It was balance being restored. They had asked me to pay rent like an adult. So I handled everything else like one too. I left in the early afternoon, when the house was unusually quiet. Sunlight spilled across the hallway floor, catching dust in the air. No one asked where I was going. No one helped me carry a box. That, more than anything, confirmed I was making the right decision. By evening, I was settled on my friend's couch, shoes kicked off, phone face down. At exactly midnight, my calendar reminder went off. I didn't watch anything happen. I didn't need to. My phone started vibrating anyway. First, a missed call. Then another. Messages stacked up, confused, irritated, then edged with panic. Is the internet down? The TV logged everyone out. Why aren't the phones working? I imagined the living room lit by a frozen loading screen. My parents standing there, remotes in hand, realizing how much of their daily comfort had been running through me. Not luxuries, routines. Silence fills a house quickly when it's used to background noise. I waited until morning to respond. Not to be cruel. To be clear. I moved out, I typed. Since you wanted me to pay rent, I assumed you didn't want me covering shared expenses anymore. No insults. No explanation beyond that. The reply didn't come immediately. When it did, it was careful. Polite. Almost respectful. That was the part that stayed with me. The moment the support stopped, the tone changed. And for the first time, the imbalance they'd lived with so comfortably was no longer mine to carry. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful, just revealing. My parents didn't apologize. They didn't accuse me either. Instead, they asked questions framed as logistics. How much does internet usually cost? Which phone plans are decent now? As if the emotional distance between us could be solved with a price comparison. Extended family heard a softened version of the story. I was being sensitive. I had moved out suddenly. No mention of the ultimatum. No mention of rent. I didn't correct anyone. I learned long ago that people believe the version that costs them the least discomfort. What surprised me was how little that bothered me. Without the constant background pressure of being needed but not valued, my thoughts became clearer. I studied better. I slept deeper. I stopped flinching when my phone buzzed. Independence didn't feel lonely, it felt accurate. The relationship with my parents changed shape. Calls became shorter. Words were chosen more carefully on both sides. They no longer assumed access to my time, my money, or my energy. Something unspoken had shifted, and it couldn't be undone. That mattered. Because this wasn't about internet or phone plans. It was about what happens when you stop funding your own dismissal. When you quietly step out of a role that only exists because you keep paying for it. If you've ever been told to be grateful while being taken for granted, you understand why this matters. Self-worth isn't loud. Sometimes, it just leaves, and lets the silence explain everything. It's been months now. I live closer to campus, in a place that's smaller but mine in every way that counts. I pay rent to a landlord who doesn't confuse control with care. When I transfer money, it buys stability, not permission to exist. My parents and I still talk. Carefully. There are boundaries now, visible and respected because they're enforced. They ask before assuming. They pause before demanding. I don't know if they fully understand what changed, but they feel it. And that's enough. What changed most was me. I no longer equate endurance with love. I don't confuse silence with maturity. I've learned that being calm doesn't mean being available, and being kind doesn't require self-erasure. The fear I once had, that standing up for myself would make me unlovable, turned out to be backward. It made me honest. The future looks quieter, more intentional. I'll finish school. I'll build a life where support flows both ways, or not at all. I'll recognize the early signs of imbalance and step back before resentment sets in. Sometimes I think about that kitchen table, the ultimatum, the folded arms, the expectation that I would bend again. I don't feel angry anymore. Just clear. They asked me to pay rent or leave. I left, and finally started living somewhere I was welcome.